Bombardment continues on Aleppo suburbs and the regime forces suffer massive damages in the neighborhood of Salah ad-Din. 98 people killed today, and the regime renews its bombardment on Homs. And U.S. Defense Minister says that al-Assad's regime is digging its own grave, and Turkey intensifies its military presence on the borders with Syria. Welcome to Orient TV English News Bulletin. The Syrian Human Rights Network reported that 98 civilians died today with a renewed bombing on helicopters on the neighborhoods of Salah ad-Din, Al-Fardous, Al-Sukkari, and many others amid intensive gunfire that destroyed many homes. And activists said that the regime forces failed to break into the district of Salah ad-Din after the massive losses they suffered at the hands of rebels. Moreover, violent clashes erupted between the regime forces and the Freedom Army near the Air Intelligence Branch in the neighborhood of Al-Zahra. In addition, the Syrian Human Rights Network also documented that 135 people were murdered yesterday by the Syrian regime fire, 61 of them in Damascus and its countryside.
Allahu Akbar.
And this is a video posted by freedom activists in the city of Anadan in Aleppo suburbs, showing members of the Syrian Freedom Army after freeing the town. The regime forces continued bombing many neighborhoods in Aleppo that are fully controlled by the Syrian Freedom Army. This bombing led to the destruction of many houses and the killing and injuring of many civilians. More about Aleppo we see in this report.
On the entrance of the city of Aleppo, the tanks of the regime transform into nothing but bodies of burnt skeletons and old antiques, where for more than 10 days the regime tried to invade the rebellious city of Aleppo and failed constantly. The reports that were received at dawn confirmed that the Syrian Freedom Army was able to destroy 4 tanks as it tried to invade Salah ad-Din neighborhood, in addition to arresting 25 soldiers and lieutenants. The media of the regime tries desperately to show the advancements of its forces on the ground, claiming that it's controlling Salah ad-Din neighborhood. But the citizens of the city are well aware that these pictures broadcasted come from Al-Hamdaniya neighborhood, at a time where faces that used to support the Syrian regime are now absent from TV, as a lot of the northern figures have run away from Syria. The bombing that's coming from the helicopters, shells and rocket launchers is what has led for the regime forces to apply after its fate in invading the neighborhoods controlled by the Syrian Freedom Army. The bombing also reached the neighborhoods of Salah ad-Din, Al-Shi'ar, Al-Sakhur, Hanano and Al-Zibdiya at a time where heavy clashes occurred near the Air Intelligence Center where the Freedom Army tried to free it. The scene did not differ in the suburbs of Aleppo, where here in Andan, the rebels were able to destroy 3 tanks and control many others. And according to political analysts, the regime is digging its grave in its own hands, in the mother of all battles, which is Aleppo.
To know more about the situation in Aleppo, we speak to Dima Al-Attar from Sham News Network, and she's a member of the Sham News Network in Aleppo. Dima, thank you for being with us. What's the latest on your end?
Actually, people of Aleppo city are living today very stressful days. They are holding our prayers in anticipation of a violent military operation of Al-Assad militia. Today, we are surprised that the regime starts to cut off the electricity, plus the internet service and the phone lines in many neighborhoods. That means he is going to isolate some neighborhoods, and that means he's going to do something bad in these neighborhoods. Many explosions, bombing, and rockets, and sharing in many neighborhoods cannons, tanks, and helicopters sailing randomly over the civilian areas, which are known to be very crowded neighborhoods. The snipers located on the roof of many buildings, and they are shooting many people. They are civilian people, not the Free Syrian Army. Today, there's around 14 men killed in Aleppo city. They are civilian, and we found 10 men self-executed at Al-Zahra neighborhood near the Air Force's security building. Also, from the beginning of the Ramadan month till today, there's more than 350 people dead, documented by names and by videos. The city is witnessed also a bread crisis. The regime punished the people of the city by closing the bakeries and cut off the flour to these bakeries. But the Syrian army at the neighborhood, which controlling it, he could employ some people to open these bakeries and to produce bread and distribute it to the people. Also, the city suffering from the accumulation of garbage in the streets. In this very hot weather, the garbage accumulation make a very bad smell, and we are afraid of the disease spread or infectious disease spread between people. We don't forget about the migration. Migrated people, the 10,000. They are located now in many schools, in many mosques, in some shelters. The shelters are very crowded. There's a shortage in the suitable aid, the milk, the food, and suitable care for these migrated people. Also, I wanted to talk about the wounded people. Yes. There's uncountable wounded people every day because of the shooting and the shelling and bombing by helicopters and cannons. And unfortunately, the field hospitals are not supplied enough to treat such a serious...
They're not very well equipped, the makeshift hospitals, as you mentioned to me. Dima Al-Attar, Sham News Network in Aleppo. Thank you very much for your valuable input. In Damascus, the regime forces stormed the neighborhood of Kafr Souseh amid public fears of another massacre, and major military reinforcements were heavily deployed in the neighborhood of Al-Zuhur, where armored vehicles entered Al-Nur and Al-Burj Street amid a campaign of arrests where many were detained. And Al-Tadaman neighborhood has witnessed violent clashes between the regime forces and the Freedom Army. Artillery shelling was renewed on the cities of Hamuriya, Al-Damir, Dariya, Mu'adhamiyya, Artuz, and Al-Sayyida Zainab, in addition to the town of Al-Buwaida and Yilda in Damascus suburbs, amid massive and random arrest campaigns. And furthermore, the town of Jadidat Artuz witnessed heavy clashes between the Syrian Freedom Army and the regime forces.
Bombing, invasions and funerals is the daily reality show that the people of Damascus and its suburbs live every day. The neighborhoods of Kafr Souseh in the capital Damascus was invaded by the Syrian regime forces after it was surrounded and subjected to arrest campaigns that reached many areas such as the neighborhood of Al-Hara. Meanwhile, the citizens remain clueless about the dead bodies that were found in the neighborhood. Massive military reinforcements spread in the neighborhood of Al-Zuhur amid arrest campaigns that captured many citizens. This comes while the snipers of the regime spread on the roofs of buildings, especially in Al-Qabun neighborhood. And Al-Hajar al-Aswad, citizens were busy monitoring the damage that was caused in their area. In Damascus suburbs, the fierce military campaigns continued and led to the killing of more victims and injuring others due to the bombardment that also targeted Hamuriya. The same scenario is repeated in Madira, Yilda, Tamir, Daraya, Artuz, Sayyida Zainab, Mu'adhamiyat al-Sham, and many other areas. Moreover, the farms of the village of Dar al-Asafir and Zibdin were bombed by mortar shells along with the hovering of helicopters around the city. Meanwhile, heavy clashes continued between the Syrian Freedom Army and the regime forces in Jiddat Artuz, which was followed by many defections in Al-Ghouta that included major generals from the 10th Brigade, where they announced forming a new unit dedicating to free Al-Ghouta from the regime's grip and to work under the Syrian Freedom Army. And while the regime increases its military campaigns, the citizens insist to stay resilient, and their will is stronger than ever, such as this woman in Al-Dayyibiyya in Damascus suburbs.
With us on the line right now is Suzanne Ahmed, the English spokesperson for the Revolution Council in Damascus suburbs, to update us with the latest developments in the capital. Suzanne, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Suzanne, in light of the escalating violence in the capital, what can you tell us about the situation there now?
Okay. Actually, everything is going on in the same way. Almost every neighborhood and almost every city is under fire. Let's just start from Tadamon. There is actually heavy artillery shelling in Tadamon from Kasyan Mountain. Assad's guns are planning to crack down the neighborhood. Serious about should have committed massacre like the one they did in Muaddamiyya.
Is this happening at the moment as we speak?
Actually, it happened a few hours ago, and we are afraid that the massacre will happen in the coming few hours. This is what we are afraid of. That's why we are claiming and we are calling for everybody who is able actually to stop killing people, to do something. It's really dangerous. People are getting killed here. By the way, what's going on right now is Berzeh and Zamalka are under fire because helicopters are roaming and firing over Berzeh and Zamalka now.
So this is what's happening at the moment. Yeah.
Sorry?
Please go on.
Okay. We got today 31 martyrs in Damascus suburbs. Among them, actually, there are 2 children. One of the martyrs actually was tortured to death. It was really awful. We have 2 massacres in Damascus suburbs, one in Yelda and the other one in Hijera, where we had 19
Suzanne, the line is cutting off. Can you repeat what you said, please?
Extrajudicial executed. Another okay, I have 2 massacres in Damascus in Yelda and Hijr. 9 people were got killed. They were extrajudicial executed. In Sayyida Zainab, we have 12 people who got killed. Unfortunately, we couldn't reach them and we couldn't bury them because of the Assad forces who are roaming and raiding the city. And there were dozens of checkpoints around Sayyida Zainab, preventing people from helping the wounded and from burying the killed people. Many cities and neighborhoods in Damascus suburbs are under fire. Helicopters are hovering over Nulat, Ta'ba, Hamuria, Harbin, Jisreen, Kafr Batna, Harasta, Misraba, and Madyara. We got to know that tens and dozens of people were wounded. We don't have a clear idea and an accurate number about people who got killed due to that helicopter shelling.
So no exact number for the people who died today so far, the exact number?
The exact number that we got 1 hour ago, it was 31. But from minute to minute, we have different numbers because shelling is going on and
so
on.
It's increasing by the hour.
Yeah, that's right. It never stops. They are using helicopters now to shell residential houses. They are using tanks and armored vehicles to storm into neighborhoods. The snipers are spread over rooftops. And they are targeting madly and randomly any moving object.
Suzanne Ahmed, the English spokesperson for the Revolution Council in Damascus suburbs, thank you so much for your valuable input. Moving on to Homs, where the heavy shelling was renewed on Arestan using rocket launchers, killing at least 4 citizens, including a child, in addition to the destruction of a big number of houses. Meanwhile, reports stated that the regime forces are getting ready to shell the village of Al-Buwaida and Al-Qusair, amid fears of a new massacre taking place. And in another development, the artillery bombing continued on the old neighborhoods of Homs, as well as Jurat Shiyah, Baba Amr, and Khalidiyya and Al-Qarabis.
الله أكبر الله أكبر حمص المحتلة حي جورة الشياح 30/7/2012.
Destruction of the already destructed is the new approach in the city of Homs. Here is Jurat al-Shayyah neighborhood. The sounds of gunfire and explosions see no end, and smoke from shelling is drawn into its dull skies. In the heart of the neighborhood, activists said weeks ago that the neighborhood was destroyed completely, where bombardments come with continuous shelling series in the districts of Homs, Bab Amr, Al-Khalidiyya and Al-Qarabis. And in the countryside, the Assad regime forces shelling, which has been going on for about 7 long, frightening months, does not seem to be stopping anytime soon. Al-Rastan, for example, daily massacres, terrible humanitarian conditions, lack of medical equipment, no water or food. Yes, this is the case in the heartlessly abused city of Al-Rastan. In At-Talbisa and other parts of Homs suburbs, the situation is fairly the same, where bombing, sounds of explosions and smoke fill the cities. Unfortunately, this is Homs, with no updates on the progress of the horrific situation of the province as a whole. The only progress recorded here is the number of murdered victims, massacred in the dozens daily.
Coming up later in the bulletin, France calls for an urgent meeting to discuss the Syrian crisis. Welcome back. You're watching Orient TV English News Bulletin. The regime forces invaded the towns of Kafr Nabuda and Tremse in Hama with more than 100 military vehicles. In the same manner, heavy clashes took place between the Syrian regime and the Freedom Army, where the regime forces were positioned in a security barrier near Halfaya. Activists also reported that the regime's helicopters bombed many towns amid robbing and arrest campaigns, where the Shabiha forces stole a big amount of money from people's homes. And the city of Kafr Zita witnessed a massive displacement of its citizens due to the massive bombardment that is currently taking place. Moving on to Deir ez-Zor, where many citizens were killed this morning and many others were wounded in a critical condition. Meanwhile, the random bombing continued on the town and the villages of Al-Sahil, the Bou Kamal, Al-Muhassan, and many others. In addition to the heavy clashes that occurred between the Syrian Freedom Army and the regime forces in many parts of the cities. In Latakia, heavy clashes occurred between the Syrian Freedom Army and the regime forces in the area of Al-Raml and Al-Falastini. Meanwhile, the regime's bombardment of rocket launchers and tanks reached Salma Resort, Jabal al-Akrad, and many others. And in another development, explosions were heard in the security barriers of the regime, in addition to the gunfire that was heard in the neighborhoods of Al-Saliba. The artillery bombardment of the regime was renewed on Dar'a and its suburbs today, which included the towns of Khirbat Ghazale, Al-Hirak, Sheikh al-Miskin, and Naima. Meanwhile, heavy gunfire was heard from the security barriers of the regime and the snipers that are positioned on the rooftops of the residential buildings, which was followed by a big displacement movement of citizens to neighboring areas. In the same manner, the regime forces besieged the town of Kafr Shams and Sheikh Miskin after a massacre was committed yesterday, which left more than 30 people dead and dozens injured.
Dozens of shells falling on the neighborhood of Al-Qusur from the Assad regime's artillery stationed in the court of Panorama, and this was only a part of a series of military operations launched by the regime forces on the city of Dar'a and its surroundings. Shells also fell on Assad Road and the Palestinian refugee camp, in addition to many other districts of Dar'a, where the district of As-Sahari was shelled again by one of the regime's military barriers. The town of An-Naima in rural Dar'a was also brutalized by the Assad regime forces' deadly missiles, while other areas were also shelled, killing and wounding several victims and utterly destructing numerous civilian homes, during which dozens of families were displaced out of their homes. Furthermore, the town of Aqraba witnessed a suffocating siege during a devastating lack of food, leading to several other families displaced out of their hometowns. However, it was an intense military operation executed by the Assad regime forces that really got the attention today, which took place in Sheikh Meskin, massacring over 50 murdered victims today. The Syrian Freedom Army, on the other hand, declared their infliction of vital losses in the Assad regime's army of killing soldiers as well as securing military equipment. This took place during fierce clashes between the two opposing sides, which even reached near the Jordanian border.
Coming up in the bulletin, France calls for an urgent meeting to discuss the Syrian crisis. U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta said that the regime's attacks on Aleppo are putting the nail in the coffin of Bashar al-Assad's government, showing that he lacks the legitimacy to rule. Speaking at the start of his week-long tour in the Middle East and North Africa, Panetta did not offer any new steps that the United States might take to end the violence in Syria, even as he renewed calls for a united international effort to bring the Assad regime down.
It's pretty clear that Aleppo is, I think, another tragic example of the kind of indiscriminate violence that the Assad regime has committed against its own people. And in many ways, I think if they continue this kind of tragic attack on their own people.
French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius confirmed that his country called for an urgent meeting in August regarding the Syrian crisis to discuss the arming of the Syrian opposition. More about the international updates we see in this report.
After Tehran, Foreign Minister and head of the Syrian regime, Walid al-Muallim, will be heading to Baghdad, according to leaks that stated that talks are being conducted with Iraqi Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki on the latest outcome of the situation in Syria. The head of the regime's diplomacy, and after receiving a dose of additional support from Iran against the conspiracy of the world, as he put it, remains in front of another test in the fluctuating Iraqi government of Nour al-Maliki that remains as the last seminar for the three-way alliance that the regime needs, especially after the arrival of the battles to Aleppo and Damascus, which is putting the regime's safety at stake. On the other hand, on the Turkish side of the border, military formations, mechanisms and tanks are massing along the border with Syria. Turkey opened its border to refugees, defectors and officers that are still looming on the buffer zone north of Syria, waiting for a prolonged decision by the West. The Western countries, and with the continued violence and massacres in Syria, did not do anything to the situation except give warnings, where the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, said that the Syrian regime is digging its grave with its hands for its attacks on Aleppo and the practice of violence on the population, without raising any new steps that might be taken by the United States against Syria. Meanwhile, France has called for an urgent meeting for the Security Council at the level of foreign ministers to discuss the situation in Syria, and the Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said that he himself will chair this meeting aimed to stop the massacres and the plight of the Syrians, as he put it. The West is lethargic to take any firm decisions that will rein in the system for its crimes, and that is actively pursuing the support for the absolute of its alliance in the region. And between this and that, the Syrian people remain victims in this revolution.
Turkey has beefed up its security reinforcements along the Syrian border with a convoy carrying tanks destined for Kilis province. The Turkish television agency DHA showed a convoy of trucks transporting around half a dozen tanks, along with troops, missile barriers, and armored vehicles. And before we wrap up, here's another look at today's top stories.
30/7/2012 قصف عنيف على حي صلاح الدين.
The bombardment continues on Aleppo suburbs and the regime forces suffer massive damages in the neighborhood of Salah ad-Din. Almost 100 people killed today, and the regime renews its bombardment on Homs, Latakia, and the rebellious cities. And U.S. Defense Minister says that al-Assad's regime is digging its own grave, and Turkey intensifies its military presence on the borders with Syria. With this, we end our news bulletin from Orient TV. For more updates about the Syrian revolution, please visit our Facebook page. Thank you for watching.